The gavel in her father's study did not make a sound, but Clara heard it fall all the same. It fell with the closing of his office door, the final, oiled click of the lock. It had been a scandal, but it had not been hers. Her cousin, Amelia, was a creature of sweet, trembling desires, a girl who confused recklessness with romance. Mr. Davies, Amelia's fiancé, was a man who confused his position with a right to pleasure. The saloon in their respectable Ohio town had private rooms upstairs, and Clara, sent to fetch her cousin before her absence was noted, had found them. She had found them in a state of disarray, Amelia's hair unpinned and Mr. Davies's face flushed with wine and victory. Clara, practical and plain, had only felt a cold dread. "Fix yourselves," she had ordered, her voice low. "You will be missed." But they had been sloppy. Amelia, giddy and panicked, had fled down the back stairs. Mr. Davies, arrogant and annoyed at the interruption, had followed her. It was Clara who was left to walk down the main staircase, her face pale with the shame of what she had witnessed. And it was Clara whom the town's chief gossip, Mrs. Hemlock, saw emerging from the hallway of private rooms. The math was simple. A respectable girl, a known philanderer, a saloon. Her father, a man who valued his name above his blood, did not ask for the truth. He demanded a denial. When Clara, incapable of lying but unwilling to condemn her cousin, could only say, "It is not what it appears, Father," he heard a confession. Amelia, naturally, wept and swore she knew nothing. Mr. Davies, to protect his own engagement, expressed his deep disappointment in Clara's lapse. The engagement, of course, was preserved. Clara's reputation was the sacrifice. The solution came by telegraph. A business associate of her father's owed a significant favor, knew of a man in Wyoming Territory, a rancher, a man named Eli Thorne, who was in want of a wife and was not particular about her history. It was a transfer, plain and simple. "You have brought dishonor to this house," her father said, his voice as flat and hard as slate. He did not shout. He was a man of cold, final judgments. "You will be married. You will go west. You will not return." Her mother, weeping, was forbidden to say goodbye. The disowning was public. Clara was walked to the train station by her father himself, a public demonstration that he was cleansing his home. He carried her single, cheap trunk. He handed her a ticket, a new, stiff-backed Bible, and a sealed letter. The letter was not addressed to her. It was addressed to Mr. Eli Thorne. It was, she knew, a letter of transfer, a bill of sale for damaged goods. The train ride was 3 days of relentless, clattering noise that did nothing to drown the silence in her head. The green, orderly fields of Ohio gave way to the flat, endless brown of the plains. And then, finally, to a land that looked like God had not yet finished it. The mountains rose up like broken teeth, gray and purple and sharp. The few people who shared her car were rough men with loud voices, or tired-looking women with children, who glanced at Clara, a young woman, traveling alone, with no wedding band and cheap luggage, and then looked quickly away. She was a woman of a certain kind, and they knew it. She arrived in Three Forks, Wyoming, in the grip of an early, vicious snow. The wind did not just blow, it seemed to scrape the buildings, carrying ice that stung her face as she stepped onto the raw, wooden platform. The town was little more than one muddy, half-frozen street, lined with false-fronted buildings huddled against the cold. Men in heavy canvas coats and fur hats stopped their conversations. They did not tip their hats, they stared. She was the one, the woman for Thorne. She had been instructed to wait at the general store. The proprietor, a man with a thin mustache and nervous eyes, barely met her gaze. "You'll be waiting for Mr. Thorne," he stated. It was not a question. She nodded, moving to stand by the cold, pot-bellied stove. She heard the whispers from two women wrapped in shawls, pretending to inspect a bolt of flannel. "That's her, the one he sent for." "Lord have mercy. What kind of woman agrees to that?" "What kind of man is he? A killer. That's what. Heard he shot his own brother, right in the chest." Over a woman, they say pride and love, always a dark mix. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. A killer. Her father had not sent her to a new life. He had sent her to a judgment. She was being married to a man who had murdered his own kin. She gripped the handle of her trunk, her knuckles white, feeling the bile rise in her throat. The store door opened, letting in a swirl of snow and a blast of frigid air. The whispers stopped. The man who stood there commanded the room, not with noise, but with an absolute, heavy stillness. He was tall, broader than any man she had ever seen, and dressed in worn sheepskin and canvas. His beard was untrimmed, his dark hair long and matted under his hat. But it was his eyes that held her. They were a deep, clear gray, and they were utterly, terrifyingly empty, as if the man inside them had left long ago and forgotten to lock the door. He did not look at her, not at first. He looked at the proprietor. "This her?" His voice was a low rasp, unused. The proprietor nodded. "She's been waiting, Mr. Thorne." Mr. Thorne, her husband, looked at her trunk, then at her. He gave one sharp nod, as if confirming an inventory. He lifted her trunk with one hand, the muscles in his forearm cording, and moved toward the door. "We ride." He said nothing else. He led her to a quiet mare, tied her trunk to a pack mule with swift, practiced motions, and mounted his own horse, a big, raw-boned roan. He watched her mount, his face impassive, as she settled her skirts. She was a decent rider, but the cold was already seeping into her boots. The journey was 2 hours of climbing into the hills, moving away from the thin smear of civilization that was Three Forks. The snow deepened. The world was only white, gray, and the black skeletons of pine trees. The silence between them was as vast and cold as the landscape. Clara, raised to believe that silence was a failure of manners, felt compelled to break it. "It is very stark country, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice sounding thin and small. He grunted, a sound that was not quite agreement. She tried again, desperate for any sign of the man. "My name is Clara Reed." He turned his head, and his unreadable eyes rested on her for a long moment. She saw something in them, not anger, not even curiosity. It was a kind of exhausted patience, like a man looking at a wound that would not heal. He nodded once, and faced forward again. "Thank you," she finally whispered, though she did not know what she was thanking him for meeting me. He did not reply. He just watched her. He watched how she handled the reins, how she braced herself against the wind, how she shivered. He was not ignoring her. He was observing her, the way a hawk observes a rabbit, trying to decide if it was worth the effort to swoop. It was nearly dark when they arrived. The ranch was a scar in the snow, a long, low-lit barn that seemed more solid than the house, a few corrals, and a small, dark cabin. It was the most isolated place she had ever seen. 2 ranch hands, one old and grizzled, one young and wary, emerged from the barn. They stopped when they saw Clara, their expressions a mixture of pity and raw curiosity. Eli Thorne swung down from his horse. He did not help her dismount. He jerked his head toward the men. "Jeb, Shorty, she's here." He seemed to stumble over the word. "She'll take the cabin." He grabbed her trunk from the mule and carried it to the cabin door, pushing it open with his shoulder. The cabin was one room. It was sparse, barely maintained. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a bed frame with a bare, stain-ticking mattress. The hearth was a black hole, filled with old, cold ashes. There was a thick layer of dust on everything. He dropped her trunk just inside the door. The sound echoed in the frigid air. "Barn's warmer," he said, not looking at her. "I sleep there." He turned and walked away, his boots crunching in the snow, leaving her on the threshold of her new home. She was alone. The hearth was cold. This was her wedding night. She was not a bride. She was an object, delivered and stored. She was too cold, too tired, to cry. She mechanically began to unpack, laying her few belongings on the dusty table. She found the kindling box, but the wood was damp. It took her half an hour, her fingers numb and clumsy, to coax a small, smoky fire to life in the hearth. It did little to fight the chill, but it was light. She huddled near it, wrapped in her coat, when she heard the voices from the barn. The door was thin, and the wind carried the sound. It was the two ranch hands. "Boss just left her in there?" It was the younger one. "Shorty, in the cold? Ain't even a proper bed." "Same as he does everything." Jeb's older, gravelly voice replied, "Don't want to touch nothing? Shorty? 'Fraid he'll break it. 'Fraid he'll harm it." Still, that business with his brother, it flat broke him. It's been 2 years. "Some things, they don't stop breaking you," Jeb said, his voice dropping. "A duel, they called it, over that woman from Cheyenne. A woman who played 'em both like fiddles. Pride and love. Nothing good comes of either. Eli got the land, but his brother, Matthew, he got the bullet. And Eli, he ain't said more'n 10 words at a time since." Clara shrank back from the door. So the whispers were true. She was married to a man frozen in guilt, a man who slept in a barn because he was afraid of his own house, his own touch. He was a killer, even if the law did not call him one. She spent the night on the bare ticking, her coat and her spare dress piled on top of her, shivering until her teeth ached. In the morning, she rose with a grim purpose. She was a punishment. She knew that, but she would not be a burden. This was survival now. She found the wood pile, fought with the frozen kindling, and got a real fire going. She found a broom and swept the layers of dust and grime from the floor. She found a bucket and fetched water from the well, her hands cracking in the cold. When Eli Thorne entered, he did not knock. He just opened the door, carrying a bucket of water. He stopped, surprised, seeing her on her knees, scrubbing the hearthstone. The room was marginally warmer. She stood up, wiping her raw hands on her apron. She had to try. She had to build some kind of life, even here. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice steady. I can cook. I can clean. I will earn my keep. I am a hard worker. You will not find me idle." She was begging. She realized. Begging to be seen as useful, not just as a piece of shameful cargo. He looked at her, and for a second, she saw that awful, vacant pain in his eyes. He was afraid, not of her, but for her, afraid of what her presence meant. She was a woman. She was life. She was a thing that could be harmed, a thing that could be broken. He looked at her as if she were made of thin glass. He shook his head, a small, jerky motion. "Ranch hands they eat in the bunkhouse. I'm fine." He set the bucket of water down by the door, and then he backed out, as if fleeing a fire. He pulled the door shut, leaving her in the silence once more. The rejection was absolute. He would not eat her food. He would not share her space. He would not even speak to her. She had been disowned by her father, shipped across the country, whispered about by strangers. And now, she was being avoided like a disease by the one man who was supposed to be her husband. She sank onto one of the hard wooden chairs, the cold of the cabin seeping into her bones, a cold that the fire could not touch. "I'm only a punishment," she whispered to the empty room, to the gray light struggling through the single dirty window. The words were bitter, tasting of ash. "That is all I am." She did not know how long she sat there. The fire burned down to embers. The light outside began to fail. She was exhausted, but she knew she could not face another night on that bare mattress. She was huddled in the chair, half frozen and drifting into a miserable sleep. when she heard a soft sound at the door. A scrape, as if something was being pushed across the threshold. She waited, her heart pounding. Nothing. Slowly, she forced her numb legs to move. She walked to the door and looked down. Just inside, sitting on the floorboards, was a heavy, folded quilt. It was handmade, old but meticulously clean. The patches were faded, calico blues and buttery yellows, worn soft as flannel. It was thick, heavy, and warm. He had not said a word. He had not come in, but he had heard her. He had heard her shivering, or perhaps he had heard her words. He had not offered comfort, but he had offered warmth. It was the first act of human kindness, however small, she had received in months. She picked it up. It smelled faintly of cedar and cold air. She wrapped it around her shoulders, the stored warmth of it a sudden, shocking comfort. The next morning, the world was gone. The wind was no longer a whistle. It was a high, thin scream. Clara pulled open the heavy cabin door and was met by a solid, moving wall of white. The snow was not falling. It was stampeding, moving sideways, burying the landscape in a furious, horizontal assault. She could not see the barn. She could not see the corrals. The world had vanished, erased by the storm. As she struggled to push the door closed against the gale, it was suddenly thrust open. Eli Thorne stumbled in, a phantom figure caked in ice and snow. He was carrying a massive load of firewood, which he dumped by the hearth, and a heavy sack of flour, which he dropped on the table. He turned, his chest heaving, and looked at the howling white void where the doorway was. He looked at her, his gray eyes dark with something she had not seen before. It was not fear, it was resignation. He did not have to say a word. She knew. They were trapped. The isolation was no longer a choice. It was absolute. The two of them, the cold cabin, the dwindling supplies, and a silence that was about to be tested. The world shrank to the size of the cabin, and the cabin shrank to the size of the hearth. Outside, the storm did not pause for breath. It was a living thing, a great white beast trying to claw its way in. The screaming of the wind through the chimney was constant, a high, thin wail that vibrated in Clara's teeth. The snow piled up, sealing the single window until only a faint, bruised blue light filtered in, making day and night nearly the same. Eli Thorne had moved with a grim, animal efficiency. He had roped a line from the cabin door to the barn, a lifeline in the blinding white. He made the perilous journey twice a day to tend the animals. His horses, the pack mule, and 2 thin milk cows. He would return caked in ice, his beard a frozen mass, bringing with him the sharp smell of hay and animal fear. He slept in the barn. He had made that clear. He would appear at the door with an armload of wood, drop it, and vanish again, a ghost in the gale. They were trapped, but they were not together. On the 3rd day, the shivering that had plagued Clara since her arrival settled deep in her bones. It was a shivering that the fire could not touch. By nightfall, it had turned into a shaking. She wrapped herself in the handmade quilt, but the cold was inside her now. She woke on the 4th day to a world that was tilted and blurred. The fire in the hearth seemed miles away. When she tried to stand, the floorboards rushed up to meet her, and she crumpled, her head striking the leg of the table. She heard the cabin door burst open, a swirl of snow and frigid air. A dark shape filled the doorway. "Fool girl," Eli's voice rumbled, thick with alarm. He was inside. The door slammed shut against the wind. He was kneeling beside her, his rough, ice-cold hands surprisingly gentle as they probed the side of her head. "No blood! You're burning!" His touch was a shock, the first real human contact she had felt in so long. He lifted her as if she weighed no more than the sack of flour he had carried in. He did not put her on the hard chair. He carried her the few steps to the bed, her bed, and laid her down on the bare ticking, pulling the heavy quilt over her. "Stay," he commanded, as if she had any choice. For the next 2 days, or perhaps 3, time had smeared into one long gray twilight. He was just a presence. He did not go back to the barn to sleep. She would drift in and out of the fever, and he would be there. He sat in the chair by the fire, watching her. He never seemed to sleep. When the shaking got bad, he would lay a heavy hand on her shoulder, a silent, anchoring weight. He melted snow in the kettle and forced her to drink, lifting her head with a hand under her neck. The water was metallic and lukewarm. He made a thin broth from jerky, and when she turned her head away, he spoke, his voice low and raw. "You will drink. I will not have a death in this cabin." The reluctance in his touch was palpable. He nursed her not with tenderness, but with a kind of grim duty, as if she were a sick calf he was bound to save. His hands were clumsy at the task, too large for the small cup, too rough to be gentle. But they were, in their own way, kind. He bathed her face and wrists with a cloth dipped in cold water, his movements awkward, his gaze fixed on the wall above her head, as if he could not bear to look at her weakness. In the grip of the fever, the walls of her mind fell down. The carefully built defenses, the pride, the shame, it all spilled out in broken whispers. The cabin was no longer Wyoming. It was Ohio. It was her father's study. "I didn't," she muttered, twisting against the quilt. "I told her to fix her hair. I told them he was arrogant." Eli, stirring the broth, froze. He turned his head, his gray eyes unreadable in the dim light. "Father, no, please, Amelia. Tell him it wasn't me." She wept, but she said nothing. She let him. Clara's voice broke, a dry, painful sob. "He said I was a dishonor. He put me on the train, said you are a punishment. Just a punishment for a sin I never. Eli Thorne stood very still. He watched the woman in the bed, her face flushed red with fever, her hands gripping the quilt. He heard the raw truth in her delirium, the unvarnished pain of a betrayal that ran deeper than any saloon scandal. He had been sent a fallen woman, a piece of unwanted baggage. That is what the letter of transfer had implied, in its cold, polite script. He was a man who knew what it was to be judged. He was the killer, the man who shot his own brother. He had accepted the title. He lived with it, slept with it in the cold hay of the barn. But this woman, shivering and muttering of her cousin, Amelia, was not like him. He had pulled the trigger. She had simply been in the wrong room. A quiet, painful understanding settled in him. He walked to the bed and sat on the edge, a thing he had avoided doing. He dipped the cloth in the water again and laid it on her forehead. She flinched, then sighed, leaning into the coolness. He did not pull his hand away. He just sat there, a large, silent guardian, listening to the storm inside her match the storm outside. When the fever finally broke, it was sudden. Clara woke to the smell of wood smoke and old coffee. She felt weak, hollowed out, but the world was blessedly still and clear. Eli was sitting at the small table, his back to her, cleaning a rifle, the pieces laid out on an oiled cloth. The cabin was quiet, save for the steady scrape of the wind and the click of the metal parts. She tried to sit up. "Mr. Thorne?" Her voice was a dry croak. He stopped his work, his hands going still. He turned slowly. His face was masked by his beard and the shadows, but his eyes were clear, and they were fixed on her with a new, troubled intensity. "You're back," he said. It was a statement, not a question. He stood, poured water into the cup, and brought it to her. He did not make her drink, but waited. She took it with a trembling hand, her fingers brushing his. His skin was rough as cured leather. "I was ill," she said. "Fever. 3 days." He went back to his rifle, but he did not pick up the parts. He just stared at them. "You stayed," she whispered. He nodded. "Once. Couldn't get to the barn. Snows drifted to the roof." He was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. The rope was still there. You heard me. It was a sudden, cold fear. What had she said? He looked up, his gaze meeting hers directly. You spoke of Ohio, of a cousin named Amelia. Clara felt the heat rise in her face, a different kind of fever. Shame. I do not recall. You said you were blamed, he said, his voice flat, for something you never did. She looked down at the quilt, at the faded blue patches. She could not deny it, not to this man who had heard the raw, unfiltered truth. It is true, she said, her voice small. My family, they needed someone to blame, to save my cousin's reputation. I was the one they chose. Eli assembled the rifle with sure, deliberate motions. He slotted the bolt into place, a solid, final sound. My brother's name, he said to the rifle, was Matthew. Clara's breath caught. He was offering a confession of his own. He was younger, softer, always wanted what I had, land, a horse, a woman. He stopped. There was a woman, from Cheyenne. Her name was Rosalie. She had hair like fire, and a laugh that made you want to do foolish things. He stood, testing the rifle's action, then leaned it against the wall. She played us, one against the other, told him I was forcing her, told me he was unkind to her. She wanted the ranch, and she wanted the man who would end up with it. She made it a contest. He stared into the fire. It ended by the creek. We were both drunk, both full of pride and poison she'd fed us. He drew on me. I was faster. He held up his right hand, looking at it as if it belonged to someone else. I was always faster. He turned to her, his face a mask of old, cold grief. I never spoke her name again. I never spoke his name again. Until today. A new silence settled in the cabin. It was not the vast, cold emptiness of before. It was a shared quiet, weighted with the things they had both lost. The next day, she was strong enough to sit by the fire. He brought the table closer, and they ate salt pork and beans, a meager, hard meal, but they ate it together. The scrape of her spoon against the tin plate was the only sound. It was softer than the silence that had come before. She found his mending basket, a small, worn thing with a few spools of thread. His shirts were piled in the corner, stiff with grime and wear. She picked one up, a blue flannel, the elbow worn through. Without asking, she threaded a needle, her hand still a little shaky, and began to patch it. She felt him watching her. Eli sat across the small room, pretending to sharpen his skinning knife, but his eyes kept drifting to her hands, pale and thin, moving with such steady purpose, the small, neat stitches, the way the firelight caught the simple brown of her hair. He felt a strange, tight lurch in his chest. It was a feeling he had buried with his brother, a confused, sharp ache that was almost, but not quite, tenderness. He was not used to this, a woman's quiet presence, not a demanding, laughing presence like Rosalie's, but this, a steady, mending quiet. That night, the fire was burning low. The storm had finally eased, but the world outside was still and dead, buried in white. Mr. Thorne? Clara asked, her voice soft. Eli, he said just the one word. Eli. She tested the name. Do you regret it? He knew what she meant. Regret what? Me, she said, looking at her hands. My father, he sent me to you as a punishment. I know that. Do you regret being saddled with me? He was silent for a long time, tracing a crack in the floorboards with the toe of his boot. No, he said, his voice rough. I don't regret you. Clara! He scrubbed a hand over his face, through his beard. I don't know how to be with folks anymore. I don't know how to be kind. You were kind, she said, looking up at him. When I was sick, you were kind. He looked at her, really looked at her. Her face was pale and thin, her eyes too large. She was not pretty, not like Rosalie. She was steadfast, like a small, tough winter bird that refused to fly south. The air between them grew thick and warm. The fire crackled. He took a step toward her, then another. He was standing over her chair. She looked up. He saw her throat move as she swallowed. He saw a flicker of not fear, something else. He leaned down, slowly. His shadow covered her. She did not move. She did not pull away. Her eyes were open, watching him. He could smell the faint, clean scent of lye soap and the dusty scent of her hair. He was inches from her mouth. It was pale, chapped from the fever. He wanted, with a sudden, desperate fierceness. To what? To kiss her? To feel something warm? He pulled back, sharply, as if he'd been burned. He turned and stalked to the other side of the cabin, bracing his hands against the cold logs of the wall, his back to her. I am sorry, she stammered, thinking she had done something wrong. It's not you, he growled, his knuckles white. Clara stood, her legs unsteady. She wrapped the quilt around her. You do not have to be afraid of me, Eli. He turned, his face anguished. I am not afraid of you. I am afraid of harming. You have not harmed me, she said, her voice gaining strength. You spared me from being alone. I was so alone. She took a step toward him. Thank you for sparing me that. He just stared at her, breathing hard, like a man who had run a long way. He gave a short, sharp nod, and then turned back to the wall. The moment was broken. A week passed. The storm was gone, leaving a bright, silent, frozen world. The supplies in the cabin were dangerously low. The flour sack was nearly empty. The jerky was gone. I have to check the traps, Eli announced one morning, pulling on his heavy coat. Stay inside. Keep the fire low. There is no wood, she said, pointing to the nearly empty wood box. I will fetch it. I will come with you. He stopped, his hand on the door latch. No, it is 20 degrees below. The snow is over your head. You are not strong enough. I am strong enough to not sit here and freeze, she said, her chin coming up. She pulled on her own thin coat and wrapped her shawl around her head. I will not be a burden. Eli, I will help. He looked at her, startled by the steel in her voice. He saw her shiver, saw the flimsy shoes she wore. He grunted, a sound of deep disapproval, but he didn't stop her. He just pulled a pair of his own thick wool socks from his trunk and tossed them to her. Put these on, over your shoes. The cold outside was a physical blow. It stole her breath. The snow was, as he'd said, drifted high, but he led her along a path he had begun to stamp down, toward a stand of pines. He carried the axe, she carried the rope. She fell, twice. The snow was deep and soft, swallowing her to the waist. She felt the panic rise, the cold biting at her legs, but she did not cry out. She gritted her teeth, clawed her way back to the packed trail, and kept walking. Eli watched her. He had offered no hand to help. He had just waited, his face impassive. But when she caught up, breathing hard, her face red with the cold, he saw something in her, a toughness he had not expected. She was not glass, after all. She was iron. He chopped, and she gathered the smaller branches, tying them into a bundle. They worked in silence, their breath pluming in the air. When they had a load, he shouldered the heavy log, and she dragged the bundle of kindling. It was a long, cold walk back. That night, she was exhausted, her muscles aching in a way they never had. She fell asleep in the chair by the fire, too tired to move to the bed, the quilt wrapped around her. Eli sat, watching the flames die down. He looked at her, curled up like a child, her face relaxed in sleep, free of the worry and sadness that usually lived there. The cabin was cold. The fire was dying. He stood. He looked at the bed. He looked at her. He walked over and, with a hesitation that was almost painful, he bent down. He slipped one arm under her knees, the other under her back. He lifted her. She was light, so light, almost nothing in his arms. She stirred, making a small sound, and her head lolled against his chest. She was warm from the quilt. He stood there for a long moment, just holding her, cradling her against his body like something precious, like something breakable he had managed not to break. He carried her to the bed and laid her down, pulling the quilt up to her chin. He smoothed a stray piece of hair back from her face, his calloused thumb brushing her temple. The skin was so soft. He pulled his hand back quickly. He stood by the bed, his heart hammering in a way it had not since before the duel. He went to his own trunk, a battered wooden thing in the corner he used as a stool. He opened it, looking for a twist of tobacco. His fingers brushed something else, a small, hidden drawer in the side. Clara, the next day, was cleaning. It was a way to feel useful, a way to reclaim the space. She swept the floor, scrubbed the table. She saw the trunk, and the dust gathered on it. She went to wipe it down, and as she did, her rag caught on a small, loose piece of wood. It was a drawer, a hidden drawer. Curious. She pulled it. Inside was a single letter, folded, the paper yellowed and soft. It was tied with a faded pink ribbon. The handwriting on the front was delicate, feminine. To my Eli. Her heart sank. Rosalie. She held it. It would be so easy. To know, to understand the woman who had broken him, who had caused a death. She thought of her own secrets, spoken in fever. She thought of his confession, ripped from him after years of silence. She closed her eyes. She pushed the drawer shut. It was not her secret to know. She went back to her mending. When Eli came in later, carrying 2 rabbits for their supper, she did not look up. "Eli," she said, her voice quiet. "Your trunk. By the wall, the side drawer is loose. You should fix it, so you do not lose what is inside." He stopped, the dead rabbits hanging from his hand. He looked at the trunk. He looked at her. She was still sewing, her head bent, her needle moving in and out of the blue flannel. She had found it, and she had not read it. He stared at her for a long time, so long that she finally looked up, a question in her eyes. He said nothing. He skinned the rabbits, his movements economical. He handed her the meat to stew, but something had shifted, settled into place. That night, the cabin was quiet. Clara was banked by the fire, preparing for sleep. She heard a noise from the far corner, a scraping sound. Eli was pulling a rough ladder down from a square hole in the ceiling. It led to a small, dark loft, a place for storage. Hay, or, she realized, a bed. The barn is still drifted," he said, his back to her. He gathered his bedroll. "I'll sleep up here. It is warmer." He did not look at her as he climbed the ladder and disappeared into the darkness above. Clara let out a breath she did not know she was holding. He was not in the barn. He was not on the chair. He was in the cabin. He was sleeping under the same roof. It was not a marriage. Not yet, but it was no longer a punishment. The snow did not melt with grace. It fought the spring, clinging to the shadows, but the sun was relentless. The thaw came not as a gentle promise, but as a messy, muddy resurrection. The world, which had been clean and white and silent, was now loud with the sound of dripping. Water ran in small, urgent rivers down the hills. The ground turned to a thick, cold slurry of mud that sucked at Clara's boots. The silence of the cabin had changed. Eli still slept in the loft above, a presence she could hear turning in his bedroll. But the shared space was no longer empty. It was waiting. They moved around each other with a new, strange awareness. He had nursed her. She had heard his deepest secret. They had survived the storm, And now, something else had to be dealt with. With the snow pulling back like a dirty sheet, the bones of the ranch were revealed. Clara, desperate for air that did not smell of wood smoke and confinement, began to walk the property, her boots sinking deep in the mud. The land was raw, studded with rock and skeletal pines. Behind the barn, half buried in a drift, she found what was left of a small shed. It had collapsed under the weight of the snows. The roof caved in, the wood dark and rotting. It looked like it had been abandoned long before the winter. And just beyond it, she saw the cross. It was not a proper marker. It was 2 pieces of wood, bound with raw hide, shoved into the earth. The thaw had pushed it sideways, and it leaned at a drunken, sorrowful angle. It was broken. One of the _RM_ was splintered, hanging by a thread of wood. She moved closer, her heart a cold knot in her chest. This was a grave, a shallow one, marked in haste and anger. The mud around it was disturbed, as if someone or something had been digging. Then she saw the carving. It was not a name, it was not a date. Scratched into the upright beam, crude and deep, was a single word: murderer. Clara recoiled, pulling her hand back as if the wood were hot. She stumbled away, back through the sucking mud, her breath coming in short, pained gasps. She fled to the cabin. The image of that word burned into her mind. Eli was not there. He was out, checking the fence line. She spent the afternoon by the fire, the mending forgotten in her lap. The word echoed. Murderer. Murderer. This was not a judgment from a stranger in a store. This was a violation. Someone had come here, to his land, and carved that word into his brother's grave. When he returned at dusk, he was caked in mud, his face grim. He saw the look on her face. "You went out," he stated. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. I saw the shed, the one that fell." His face hardened. He knew, instantly. He began unbuckling his gun belt, his movements stiff. "It's nothing, just old lumber." "And the marker," she whispered. "By the shed." Eli stopped. He did not turn. His broad back was a wall of muscle, tensed against her words. He said nothing. "Eli," she pressed, "who is buried there?" "Leave it," he said, his voice a low growl. "It's not your concern." "It is my concern," she said, finding a sudden, strange strength. "I am your wife. I live here. I saw the word they carved." He spun around, his face a mask of such raw, terrible pain that she almost took a step back. "And what of it? You think I do not know what they call me? You think I have not seen it?" His voice was thick with a grief so old it had turned to poison. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the tin cups jump. "Leave it be. Clara, I am warning you." He grabbed his coat and stormed out. Not to the barn, but just out, into the cold, muddy twilight. He left her with the echoes of his rage. But it was not rage, she realized. It was shame. A shame so deep it had hollowed him out. It was the same shame she had felt in her father's study. The shame of being judged, of being labeled something vile, and of not having the words to fight back. She let him be. She made supper, a thin stew of their last rabbits. She ate alone. The ladder to the loft remained untouched. He did not come back. She found him, hours later, by the grave. He was on one knee in the mud, holding the 2 pieces of the broken cross. He was trying to fit them back together, but his large, calloused hands were shaking. She walked up quietly, holding a lantern. The small, yellow light illuminated his tormented face. He did not look up. "It was Matthews," he said, his voice hoarse. "My brother." "I know," she said softly. She knelt beside him, uncaring of the mud that seeped through her dress. "Who did this? Eli?" "Someone from town," he said, his voice flat. After it happened, I buried him here. Our mother, she loved these hills. I thought he should be here. Not in the town cemetery. not to be gawked at. He dropped the broken wood. I came out one morning, and it was like that, the cross broken, the word carved. Maybe it was Sloane, maybe one of his friends, or maybe she sent someone. Rosalie? He nodded, his gaze fixed on the shallow mound, to remind me what I am. They were quiet for a long time, the only sounds the gurgle of melting snow and the far-off call of a coyote. You told me you were defending yourself. Clara said. I was, he said, his voice ragged. He drew first. He was drunk. I told him to walk away. I told him she was not worth it. He said I was a coward. He said I always took what was his, and he drew. Eli rubbed his face, the rasp of his beard loud in the stillness. I was faster. I always was. But that is not the part that haunts me. Clara. He looked at her, his gray eyes dark and lost in the lantern light. He drew, but I think I wanted him to. Rosalie had us both so twisted, so full of pride and anger. I think I wanted a reason. I wanted to win. I wanted her, and I wanted the ranch, and I wanted him gone. I do not know if I meant to kill him, but I meant to shoot. I meant to win. What kind of man is that? What kind of brother? He had finally said it. The truth that kept him in the barn. The guilt that was not for the act, but for the intent. Clara looked at the muddy grave, at this broken, grieving man, and she felt no fear, only a deep, aching kinship. My father, she began, her voice low and steady. He looked at her, surprised by the change of subject. I told you he blamed me, she said. I did not tell you all of it. She took a breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. After the scandal, my cousin Amelia, she begged me not to tell the truth. She said it would ruin her. My father, he did not ask for the truth. He just locked me in my room for 2 days, with no food, just water. He said I was to think on my sin. Eli's head came up, his eyes sharp. On the 3rd day, Clara continued, her voice flat. I heard him talking to my mother, about you, about Wyoming, about sending me away. I tried to run. I packed a small bag. I had a little money saved. I was going to go to my aunt in Philadelphia. I thought she would believe me. She stared at the lantern, at the small, trapped flame. He caught me at the bottom of the stairs. He did not shout. He took me back to his study. He locked the door. He said he was going to beat the sin out of me. He used his belt. He told me that if I cried out, he would tell my mother I had fallen. He said he would send me to an asylum for hysterical women if I did not agree to this, to you, to this marriage. She looked at Eli. He called it righteousness. He said he was saving my soul, but he was just breaking me. So I would be quiet, so I would not be a problem, so he could save his precious honor. She touched the broken cross. They called you a murderer. They called me a fallen woman. They threw us both away. Eli, to save their own reputations. He stared at her. He was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. She was not a punishment. She was not a cast-off. She was a survivor. She was a woman who had been beaten by her own father, and she was still here, kneeling in the mud, trying to fix a stranger's grave. And she, in turn, saw him. He was not a beast. He was not a killer. He was a man, trapped by a single, terrible moment, and by a world that would not let him forget it. He reached out, his hand trembling, and his fingers brushed the sleeve of her dress. He hurt you. Yes, she said. They all did, but I am still here. He looked down at his own hand, the one that had held the gun. I broke the cross. When I saw the word, I smashed it. It was me. Then we will build a new one. Clara said. The long ride to Three Forks was necessary. The thaw had been hard, but the supplies were gone. They needed flour, salt, coffee, and ammunition. They rode side by side, the pack mule trailing behind. The silence was different. It was not empty. Eli pointed out a hawk circling high above. Redtail, he said. She nodded, watching it. It was the first time he had spoken of anything that was not the past, or the work. Three Forks had not changed. It was a street of mud, lined with false-fronted buildings and men who had nothing better to do than stare. When they rode in, the town went quiet. Conversation stopped. Men leaning on barrels straightened up. They looked at Eli Thorne, the killer, and then they looked at the woman beside him, the woman he had been sent. Clara kept her chin high, her eyes fixed forward, but she could feel the stares. They were heavy, and they were dirty. They undressed her. They judged her. They dismissed her. Eli dismounted, his movements stiff. He tied the horses to the hitching rail in front of the general store. He did not offer to help her, but he waited for her, placing himself between her and the watching town. Inside, the store was dim and smelled of cured meat, kerosene, and damp wool. The proprietor, Mr. Finch, who had barely looked at her when she first arrived, now nodded stiffly. "Mr. Thorne, ma'am." "Finch," Eli said, his voice flat. He handed him a list. Flour, coffee, salt, bacon, and a box of cartridges. 45. As Finch gathered the items, Clara felt the eyes of the other people in the store. Two women, wrapped in shawls, were whispering by the fabric bolts, their faces pinched with mean, pinched piety. Clara heard the word damaged. A man was leaning against the far counter, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. He was large, unkempt, and his eyes were red-rimmed. Clara recognized him as one of the men who was always loafing on the boardwalk. His name was Sloane. Sloane pushed himself off the counter and swaggered toward them, a smirk on his face. "Well, well," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole store to hear. "Look at that." Thorne finally decided to show his face, and he brought his purchase with him. Clara froze. Eli, who was counting out coins, slowly, deliberately, stopped. He did not look up. "Mind your words. Sloane." Sloane laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Why? It's true, ain't it? Heard her family paid you to take her, shipping her off like bad cargo." He took another step, leering at Clara. "What's the going rate for a what I hear 'em call it a whore bride?" It happened so fast, Clara did not even see it. Eli moved. He was not a man anymore. He was a force. He crossed the space in one stride, grabbed Sloane not by the shirt, but by the throat, and lifted him off his feet. Sloane choked, his eyes bulging, the bottle smashing to the floor. Eli did not hit him. He did not draw his gun. He dragged him, choking and kicking, out of the store and threw him into the muddy street. The entire boardwalk had stopped to watch. Eli stood over the gasping man, his shadow falling across him. His hand was on the grip of his pistol, but he did not draw. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, deadly rumble, colder than the winter storm. "You will not speak her name," Eli said, his voice vibrating with a control that was more terrifying than any rage. "You will not look at her. She is Mrs. Thorne. She is under my protection." He looked at Sloane, who was trembling in the mud, trying to crawl backward. "Am I clear?" Sloane nodded, frantically. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. God, yes." Eli turned his cold gaze on the silent, watching crowd. "This goes for all of you. Stay away." He turned, his back to the town, and walked back into the store. His hands, Clara saw, were shaking. His face was pale. He walked to the counter, pulled the coins from his pocket, and dropped them, one by one. His voice was tight. "Our supplies." Mr. Finch, his own face pale, hurriedly finished sacking the goods. "Yes, Mr. Thorne, right away." The ride home was silent, but it was a new kind of silence. It was charged, electric. Clara kept looking at his profile, at the hard line of his jaw, at his hands, which were now gripping the reins so tightly his knuckles were white. Her father had used his name to shame her. Eli had used his name to protect her. Back at the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the muddy snow in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful. For the first time, they unloaded the supplies. They moved around each other, intensely aware. He built up the fire. She began to put the flour away. She was mending one of his shirts, the blue flannel he had worn that day, the one she had patched before. The confrontation had ripped a seam in the shoulder. He was sitting at the table, his back to her, just staring into the fire. His hands were on the table, still unsteady. She finished her stitching. She bit the thread. She folded the shirt. She walked over to him. He did not look up. He probably expected her to just set the shirt down. She set it aside. She reached out, slowly, and touched his hand, the one that had grabbed Sloane, the one that had shot Matthew. He flinched, but did not pull away. "Your hands are shaking," she whispered. He stared at their joined hands, hers, pale and small, resting on top of his, which was large, calloused, and trembling. He choked out. "I almost did it again. I almost lost." "You did not," she said softly. "You did not hit him. You did not harm him. You protected me." He turned his head, and his eyes met hers. The raw pain, the guilt, the loneliness, it was all there. She did not wait. She had been passive all her life, pushed, sent, beaten, and silenced. She would not be silent now. She leaned in. Her other hand came up, not to his shirt, but to his face. She touched his rough, bearded cheek. And then she kissed him. It was hesitant, at first, just a press of her mouth to his. It was chapped, bristly, and tasted of coffee and the cold air. It was a question. He froze. For one long, terrible second, he was completely still, a statue of stone. Then a sound came from him, a low, broken groan, from deep in his chest. It was the sound of a man starving. His arms came around her, pulling her off her feet and into his lap. His mouth met hers. And this time, it was not hesitant. It was hungry. It was desperate. It was 2 years of silence and a lifetime of loneliness. Pouring out. It was all the unspoken words, all the shared shame, all the cold of the long winter. It was raw, and it was deep, and it was a drowning. Clara kissed him back with a matching fierceness, her hands moving from his face to tangle in his long hair, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in the world. And then, just as suddenly, he broke it. He tore his mouth from hers, gasping, and pushed her away. Not violently, but with a blind panic. He shoved her off his lap, stumbling to his feet, backing away until he hit the far wall of the cabin. "I cannot," he paged, his chest heaving. He looked at her, his eyes wide with a terror she did not understand. "Clara, no, I am what they say I am. I am a beast. I break things. I, Rosalie Matthew, I will hurt you." He was terrified. Not of her, but of himself, of this passion. He saw it as the same poison that had led him to kill his brother. He could not separate desire from destruction. Clara's heart was pounding, her lips burning from the kiss, but she was not afraid, not of him. She stood slowly, her legs shaking. She walked to him, to this large, powerful man who was cowering against the wall, terrified of his own heart. She reached up and took his face in both her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Eli," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Look at me." He did. His eyes were wild. "My father beat me," she said, "and he called it righteousness. My cousin betrayed me and called it family. My town shunned me and called it justice. They broke me, every day for months. They threw me away." She pressed her palms against his rough cheeks. You have not broken me. Her voice cracked, but she held on. You healed me. You healed me more than anyone else ever tried. His anguish warred with a fragile, dawning hope. He looked at her as if he had never seen a human being before. He did not kiss her again. Instead, his entire body seemed to sag, the fight going out of him. He leaned forward, his arms wrapping around her waist, and he buried his face in her hair. His body was shaking, not with passion, but with a terrible, silent sob. She just held him, her arms around his neck, her own tears wet on his shoulder. She held him until the shaking stopped. Later, the fire had burned down to embers. The cabin was cold. Clara was in the bed, under the heavy quilt, her body still humming from the kiss, her heart aching with a tenderness that was almost painful. She heard a sound. Eli was climbing down from the loft. He stood in the middle of the room, a dark silhouette against the dying coals. He was still fully dressed. "Clara?" he whispered. I am cold," she whispered back. It was not a lie, but it was also an invitation. He hesitated for a long moment. She heard him take off his boots, the soft thud on the floor. She heard the metallic jingle as he unbuckled his gun belt and laid it on the table. He walked to the bed. He lay down, but on top of the quilt, stiff as a board, his back to her. The cold air seeped in between them. She shivered. He let out a long, slow breath. Then, carefully, he lifted the edge of the quilt. He slid under it, still fully clothed, his back still to her. They were inches apart, but not touching. The small space between them was frigid. A long, long silence. Clara made a decision. She turned, her body moving stiffly, until her front was pressed against his broad, clothed back. She could feel the warmth of him, the solid, living reality of him. She took a breath, and she slid one arm around his waist, holding onto him. He tensed, his whole body going rigid as stone. She did not move, she just held him. Then, slowly, his large, calloused hand came up. It covered hers, pressing her arm tight against his own stomach. His fingers laced through hers. He did not speak. She did not speak. They lay there, in the cold, dark cabin, holding on. It was more intimate than any kiss. It was not passion. It was not desire. It was anchor. It was safety. It was two broken, discarded things, finding a way to be whole, right there in the darkness. That first morning was a trial. Clara woke with a start, her body warm for the first time in what felt like a year. It was a deep, bone-deep warmth. She was on her side, and the source of it was pressed against her back. Eli. He was still there, his arm thrown over her waist, his hand still loosely holding hers on top of the quilt. He was breathing slow and deep, his face turned toward her back. He was still fully clothed in his rough work pants and flannel shirt. She lay perfectly still, her heart hammering. It was one thing to find comfort in the dark, in the grip of shared trauma. It was another thing entirely to face the gray light of morning. She felt him stir. His breath hitched. And then he was awake. Instantly, he went rigid, the way a deer does when it scents a wolf. Slowly, carefully, he removed his arm from her waist. He pulled his hand from hers. He slid from the bed, his feet hitting the cold floorboards with a soft thud. Clara did not move. She kept her eyes closed, pretending to be asleep, her face burning. She could not bear the shame of this new awkwardness. She heard him move to the hearth, the scrape of the shovel, the crackle of new kindling. He was making the fire. He was not climbing to the loft. He was not running to the barn. He was staying. She finally sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face. The cabin was cold, but the small fire was already catching. Eli was at the stove, his back to her, measuring coffee grounds into the pot. The rain stopped, she said, her voice small. He nodded, not turning. "Mud'll be deep." And that was it. The moment passed. The awkwardness did not vanish, but it was pushed aside by the simple, relentless demands of the day. He was here, She was here. The world was beginning to thaw. Spring on that ranch was not a gentle thing. It was a battle. The snow retreated, leaving behind a landscape of raw rock and thick, sucking mud. The ranch itself, Eli's inheritance, was in a sorry state. He had let it go. In the 2 years of his grief, the fences were down. The barn roof had a leak. The place was collapsing, just as he had. But now, he had a reason to build it back. They started with the fences. It was brutal, cold work. He dug the post holes, his muscles straining, the thick clay fighting him for every inch. Clara, her skirts tied up and her hands raw, would brace the new cedar posts while he tamped the earth around them. She fetched the wire. She handed him the staples. It was a new rhythm. He would grunt. Post! She would drag one over. He would slam the heavy maul down. Thud, thud, thud. She would hold the wire spool, her arms aching. They worked for hours, saying almost nothing, but it was a shared, working silence. It was the silence of a team. One afternoon, they were trying to fix the chicken coop. The snow had crushed one side of it. They had shooed the few half-wild hens out, and Eli was wrestling a new beam into place. "This whole thing," he grumbled, "is rotted. Should tear it down." "We need the eggs, Eli," she said, balancing on a rock, holding the beam steady for him. "We need a miracle," he muttered. Just then, a scrawny, bold hen, who had been watching them with beady, suspicious eyes, made a break for it. It darted into the broken coop, found a hole, and got itself stuck between the new beam and the old wall. It let out a squawk of pure, indignant fury. "Damn it," Eli said, dropping his hammer. He tried to reach in, but the hen pecked him, hard. "You stubborn bird." He tried to scare it out. It just flapped, sending up a cloud of dust and old feathers, half blinding him. Clara, watching this big, grim man, this killer, being defeated by a chicken, felt a bubble of something strange in her chest. He finally jammed his arm in, grabbed the hen by the leg, and pulled it out. It came free, flapping and screeching, and in its panic, it raked its claws across his face and flapped straight onto his head. Eli froze, standing stock still. A live, furious chicken perched on his hatless hair, its wings spread wide for balance. Clara covered her mouth. It was a snort, at first, then it was a giggle. Eli slowly reached up, his face a mask of profound exasperation. He looked at her, his gray eyes narrowed, the chicken feathers sticking to his beard. Clara could not hold it in. She laughed. It was not a polite Ohio laugh. It was a real, deep, breathless laugh, the kind that hurts your stomach. It was the first time she had truly laughed since before the saloon, before the shame. Eli stared at her. He saw her face transformed, bright and alive, her eyes sparkling with tears. And then a strange, rusty sound rumbled up from his own chest. It was a crack in his hard, frozen face. His mouth quirked. He let out a short, barking sound. He was laughing. He pulled the chicken off his head, tossed it, and leaned against the coop, a low, unused chuckle shaking his shoulders. The sound was more beautiful to her than any music. The work settled them. They were partners. The cabin began to change. She scrubbed the floors until the wood was pale. She aired out the bedding. She even tacked up a piece of calico cloth they had bought to make a curtain for the window. She started to hum in the mornings. It was an old tune her grandmother used to sing, a simple, wandering melody. Eli would sit at the table, drinking his coffee, and just listen. He had forgotten what a house was supposed to sound like. He had forgotten peace. She took the new bolt of blue flannel they had bought in town. She had patched his old shirts until they were more patch than shirt. Now, she was going to make him a new one. "I need to measure you," she said one evening, the tape measure in her hand. He stood, awkward. "Clara." "Stand still," she ordered, her tone practical, though her heart was fluttering. She had to touch him. She measured his shoulders, her hands resting on the broad, solid muscle. She measured his chest, her arms having to go all the way around him. She felt the heat of him, the solid, living beat of his heart under her hands. He stood rigid, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the far wall. She measured his arms, from the shoulder to the wrist, her fingers brushing his skin. When she was done, she stepped back, her face flushed. "Thank you." He let out his breath, a long, slow sigh. It's not needed. The mending is fine." "I want to," she said, and he understood. It was not a duty. It was a choice. The next day, he took her out. The snow was gone from the lower meadow. He had his rifle, and he had his pistol. "You live here," he said, his voice flat. "You need to know the riding in this." "The riding? You ride like you're sitting in a parlor," he said, nodding to the mare. "This is not a parlor. This is Wyoming. You ride astride. It's the only way to stay on when the land fights you." She blushed. It was scandalous, a woman riding like a man. But she looked at the hard, rocky land. He was right. She untangled her skirts and, feeling awkward and exposed, she mounted. He taught her how to grip with her knees, how to move with the horse, not against it. She was a quick learner. She was tough. Then, the gun. He held out his rifle. She looked at it, her stomach clenching. It was the tool of his guilt. I do not want to touch it, Eli." "I know," he said, his voice soft, pained. "I hate it too. But there are wolves. There are men like Sloan. I cannot always be here. You must know how to protect what is ours." "What is ours?" She took the rifle. It was heavy, oily, and cold. "It is not part of you," he said, standing behind her. "It is a tool. No more. Brace it. Here." He put his hand on her shoulder, pushing the rifle stock into the hollow. His hand was warm. "Breathe out, then squeeze. Do not pull." She did. The explosion was deafening, the recoil slamming the stock into her shoulder, bruising her. She cried out, dropping the rifle. She had missed the can he set on a log by 20 feet. "Again," he said, his voice implacable. She was angry, at the gun, at him, at the bruise. She snatched it up. "You are fighting it," he said. He stepped closer. He was right behind her now. She could feel his chest against her back. "Do not fight it. Let it be steady." He put his arms around her, his hands covering hers on the rifle stock and trigger. His body was a solid wall against her back. She could smell the lye soap on his skin and the faint, dusty scent of him. Her breath caught. "Breathe," he whispered, his mouth close to her ear. She let out her breath, her body pressed against his. "Now." She squeezed. The shot was another deafening crack, but this time, his body absorbed the recoil with hers. The can on the log jumped. She had hit it. She turned in his arms, her face flushed with triumph. I hit it!" They were chest to chest. His hands were still on her arms. His face was inches from hers. The gray eyes were no longer empty. They were dark, and they were full of want. He did not move. She did not move. The moment stretched, full of the rifle smoke and their shared breath. He let her go, stepping back, his face closing up. "Good," he said, his voice thick. "That is good." That night, the tension was a new thing in the cabin. It was not awkward. It was heavy. They had slept in the same bed for weeks, but it had been a comfort, not a desire. They were clothed, separate, their hands sometimes finding each other in the dark. A comfort. This was different. Clara sat by the fire, her hands trembling in her lap. She was done being passive. She was done being a victim. She was done being afraid. "Eli?" He looked up from the harness he was oiling. "When I came here," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "I came because I was ordered. I was performing a duty. I was accepting my punishment." He winced, the words hitting him. "Clara." "No," she said, standing up. "Please, let me say this." She walked to him, stood in front of him. It is not a duty, not anymore. I am not your prisoner. I am not your burden. I want to be here." He looked up at her, his face a mask of confusion and a terrible, fragile hope. "I want to be your wife, Eli," she said, her voice shaking, but she held his gaze. Not in name, not because my father sent me, but because I desire to be." She said the word desire, the word he feared, the word he associated with Rosalie, with Matthew, with death. He stood up, slowly. He was so much taller than her. He looked down at her, his face anguished. "Clara, you do not know what you are asking. The part of me that feels that it is the part that destroys." "You did not destroy me," she whispered, reaching up to touch his chest, right over his heart. "You saved me. You are a good man. Eli Thorne. You are the best man I have ever known." "I am not," he groaned, but he did not pull away. "You are," she said. She rose on her toes, and she kissed him. He was still for a moment, and then a low, broken sound came from him. This time, he did not pull away. His arms came around her, lifting her up, his mouth crashing down on hers. It was a kiss of rain and fire, of all the held-back loneliness, of all the shared pain. It was not a kiss of seduction. It was a kiss of recognition. That night, the rain began to fall. Not a cold, sleeting rain, but a warm, spring storm, drumming on the roof, washing the last of the winter away. There were no more words. There was no more fear. He undressed her slowly, his rough hands trembling as they touched her skin. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she was not ashamed. He laid her on the bed, on the clean sheets she had washed, and for the first time, there was no quilt between them. There was no flannel. There was just skin. It was raw. It was tender. It was solace. It was two people who had been thrown away, finding in each other's touch a reason to be found. It was breath and shadow, and the sound of the rain, and a quiet so deep it was like a prayer. Afterward, in the dark, they lay tangled together. Clara had her head on his chest. She heard his heart, a strong, steady beat beneath her ear. She felt a dampness on his cheek. He was crying, silently, his body shuddering with it. "Eli?" she whispered. I never," he choked out, his voice thick. "I never thought I would be clean again." She rose up on one elbow, looking at him in the dim, gray light from the window. She saw the old, faint scar on his chest, a white line from some old ranching accident. She leaned down, and she kissed it. She kissed the pulse in his throat. She kissed the salty track of the tear on his cheek. "You are not what you did, Eli," she whispered, her mouth against his skin. "You are who you are now, and you are mine." He held her then, held her as if she were the only thing keeping him from drifting away in the dark. A week later, he was different. He smiled. He actually smiled, small crinkles at the corners of his eyes. He touched her all the time, a hand on the small of her back as she passed, his fingers brushing hers when he handed her a cup. He was a man coming back to life. She found him one evening, carving a small piece of cottonwood. He had been secretive about it, hiding it when she came near. That night, he held it out to her. It was a small locket, carved in the shape of a simple, 5-petaled flower. It was rough, but it was made with such care. It is just cottonwood," he said, his voice gruff. "Soft." He opened it. Inside, nestled in the pale wood, was a small, deep blue stone, a sapphire. "It was my mother's," he said, not meeting her eyes. She had a ring. She always said the sky in these hills was a sapphire. She would have liked you. You are tough, like she was." He had given her his past, not the dark part, but the good part. His mother, his home. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She could not speak. She just threw her arms around his neck, and he held her. This, she thought, was their true wedding. A few days later, she needed to ride to Three Forks. She had written a letter. It was to her aunt in Philadelphia, the one she had tried to run to. It was a short letter. It just said, "I am all right. I am happy. Do not worry for me." She needed to post it. She needed to close that door. "I will ride with you," Eli said. "No," she said, surprising herself. I need to do this alone. I will be fine. I have the rifle." He looked at her, and he saw the new strength in her. He nodded. "Be back by dark." She rode into Three Forks, and it was different. She was different. She was Mrs. Eli Thorne. She was not a cast-off. She was a woman who was loved. The stares of the men on the boardwalk did not matter. She hitched her horse, posted her letter, and bought a small bag of sugar candy, a treat for Eli. She was coming out of the store, a small smile on her face, when she heard the voice. "Clara?" The voice was familiar, but wrong, hateful. She turned. It was her cousin, Amelia. Amelia was standing by a rented buggy, dressed in fine, Eastern clothes that were splattered with mud. Her face, which Clara remembered as soft and pretty, was now pinched and hard. "Amelia?" Clara was stunned. What are you doing here? How did you—" "How?" Amelia laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "How? I have been in Cheyenne for a week, waiting for the roads to clear. All because of you." "Me?" You ruined everything," Amelia hissed, her voice low and venomous. "My engagement, Mr. Davies, he is cold. His family looks at my family with suspicion. All because of your scandal, the one you caused." "I did not cause it. Amelia, you know the truth." "It does not matter." Amelia's face was white with rage. "You were the one who was seen. You were the one who was sent away in disgrace. And now my reputation is stained. But your father, he is coming to fix it." Clara's blood went cold. The bag of candy slipped from her hand. My father, here?" "Yes," Amelia spat. "He is on the stage from Cheyenne. He should be here tomorrow. He has papers, a court document." What document?" "To take you back," Amelia said, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "He is having this joke of a marriage annulled. He says you were stolen property. He says you were married against his will. He is taking you back to Ohio. Clara, and you will be dealt with." "Dealt with?" The words hit Clara like a physical blow. The study, the lock, the belt, the darkness. She did not say another word. She turned, her mind blind with pure, animal terror. She fumbled for the reins of her horse. "You will not get away! Clara!" Amelia shrieked. "You have to—" Clara was on the horse, astride, and she slammed her heels into its sides. The horse leaped forward, scattering mud. She fled. She rode as Eli had taught her, low and fast. But this was not a ride. It was a flight. She rode the horse half to death, the wind screaming in her ears. But all she could hear was dealt with. She burst into the cabin, the door slamming open. Eli was at the table, carving another piece of wood. He looked up, smiling. The smile died when he saw her face. "Clara?" "He's coming," she gasped, sliding from the horse, stumbling into the room. "He's my father. He's coming." She was sobbing, incoherent, babbling the story. "Amelia, she was there. He has papers and annulment. He's taking me back." Eli listened, and she watched, in horror, as the man she loved vanished. The warmth, the life, the smile, it all drained away. His face closed up, becoming the hard, gray, empty mask from the day they first met. He did not comfort her. He did not hold her. He stood up, turned, and pulled his old saddlebag from under the bed. He began to pack. A change of clothes, a box of cartridges. "What?" Clara whispered, the terror in her chest turning to a cold, sick dread. What are you doing? We have to bar the door. We have to fight." "I am leaving," he said, his voice dead, empty. Her world stopped. "What?" "He is your father," Eli said, his back to her, his voice flat. "He is right. This was a mistake. You do not belong here. You are a lady. You are from Ohio. You are educated." He buckled the bag. "You deserve better than this, better than a killer, a man who lives in the mud." "No," she whispered. "No, Eli." "He will be here tomorrow," Eli said, his voice void of all emotion. "When he arrives, I will be gone. Though the marriage, it can be undone. You will be safe. You can go home. You can be respectable. Again." He was doing it. He was agreeing with them. He was not her protector. He was her final judge. He was throwing himself away, and he was taking her heart with him. "Safe?" Her voice was a high, thin whisper. "You call that safe? Do you have any idea what he will do to me, what that is?" "He is your father," he repeated, as if that explained everything. "He is a monster!" she shrieked. "And you are just like him." He stopped, his hand on his rifle. He turned, slowly, and his eyes were full of a pain so deep it was black. "Do not say that." "It is true!" she screamed, the tears blinding her. "You are just throwing me away, just like he did, just like Amelia, just like everyone. You are cowards." He picked up the rifle. He picked up the saddlebag. He walked to the door. "You will be better off, Clara." This was it. He was leaving. He was abandoning her to the man who had beaten her. She screamed. It was not a word. It was a raw, animal sound, torn from the deepest part of fear, a sound of pure, absolute terror and rage. "Don't!" He stopped, his hand on the wooden latch. She flew at him, her hands balled into fists, hitting his broad, unfeeling back. Don't you dare!" she was sobbing, hitting him over and over. "Don't you dare throw me away! Don't throw me away like everyone else did!" Her words throw me away. They hit him. They got through the guilt. They got through the self-hatred. He froze. He was not saving her. He was betraying her. He was doing the one thing she had begged him not to do. He turned. Slowly, he dropped the saddlebag. He dropped the rifle. He looked at her face, which was streaked with tears and mud, her eyes wide with a terror that was not for her father, but for him. He choked. Clara, I thought." "We fight," she whispered, her hands gripping the front of his shirt, her face buried in his chest. You do not leave me. You fight for me. Eli, please, fight for me." He held her, his arms wrapping around her so tightly she could barely breathe. He held her, and his eyes, looking over her head at the cabin wall, went hard, not empty, not vacant, but hard, cold, the way they had been in the general store, the way they had been at the creek, with Matthew. "All right," he said, his voice a low, deadly rumble. "All right, Clara, we fight." They did not have to wait for morning. They came at dusk the very next day. Eli saw them first. He was on the small porch, cleaning his rifle, his movements calm, but his eyes were fixed on the low pass that led to the road. Clara was inside, her hands clenched in her apron, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She had been packing, not to leave him, but to leave with him, stuffing what little they had into 2 saddlebags. There were 4 riders. Her father, Mr. Reed, sat his horse as if it were a high-backed chair in his study. his face a mask of cold, righteous fury. Beside him was her cousin, Amelia, her face pale and pinched, and flanking them were two men Clara had never seen, hard men with rifles resting easy on their saddles. They were not law, they were hired. "Mr. Thorne," her father's voice boomed, sharp and clear, a sound that did not belong in the raw, quiet hills. "You have property that does not belong to you." Eli stood, his own rifle held loose in one hand, pointed at the ground. He did not move from the porch. "This is my land," he said, his voice a low, quiet rumble that carried further than her father's shout. "And this is my wife." "She is not your wife, Mr." Reed swung down from his horse. He held up a piece of paper, waving it like a weapon. "I have a document, a court order from Judge Hemlock in Three Forks. This sham is over. It is annulled." "You cannot annul what is real," Eli said. "It is invalid," her father snapped. "The woman was taken by force. She was unwell, coerced. She is my daughter, sir, my blood, and she is my property, until I see her given away. And I did not give her to the likes of you." Clara stepped out of the cabin door, her terror replaced by a sudden, cold anger. "Father, stop this!" His head snapped toward her, his eyes, cold and gray as a winter river, raked over her. He saw her, not as his child, but as a defiant, stained object. He saw her worn dress, her rough hands, her hair, which she now wore in a simple, practical braid. He saw her standing beside Eli, and his face tightened. "Clara, you will come now. You have caused this family more than enough shame. It ends today." "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was solid. "These men," her father said, gesturing to the two riders, "are authorized by the court in Three Forks to retrieve you. Your husband has been interfering with my lawful guardianship. They are here to see him jailed, and you returned." "Eli, no," Clara whispered, her hand moving to his arm. Do not do what they want. Do not fight them." "He's right," Eli said, his voice so low only she could hear. "We fight here, they'll call it murder. And you'll be a murderer's widow. We have to trust the law, even a rotten one." He looked at her father. "Judge Hemlock, you say? Fine. We'll see the judge." He laid his rifle on the porch. "We will ride in together." Her father smiled, a thin, triumphant twisting of his lips. "I thought you might see reason. You will, of course. Ride first, and unbound. We are civilized men, after all." The court was the back room of the Three Forks Saloon, the same place Mr. Davies and Amelia had met. It stank of stale whiskey, cigar smoke, and hypocrisy. Judge Hemlock, a man with a heavy gold watch chain and a face flushed with drink, sat behind a battered desk. He looked, Clara thought, like a man who knew her father's gossip-loving wife, Mrs. Hemlock, from back east. He looked like a man who knew where his interests lay. Her father stood, laying out his case with cold, legal precision. "Your Honor, this man has taken my daughter. She was distraught, unbalanced. This so-called marriage was performed under duress. She is my blood, my ward. I am here to take her home, to see she gets the medical care she needs." Eli stood, his hands clasped behind his back. "She was not under duress. She came here on a ticket you bought with a letter you wrote, transferring her to my care." "A letter of inquiry, nothing more," her father lied, his face smooth. "She is my wife," Eli insisted, his voice a low thrum of controlled anger. "By her own choice. We live as man and wife. Ask her." All eyes turned to Clara. Judge Hemlock peered at her. "Well, girl, this man, Thorne, he force you? You want to go home with your PA? Tell the truth, now." Clara stood. Her legs were shaking, but she locked her knees. She looked at her father. She looked at Eli. "I was not forced. Your Honor, I choose to be here. I am Mrs. Eli Thorne. I will not go back with him." Her father's eyes narrowed to slits. "She is clearly confused. Look at her, dressed in rags, living with a known killer." "That is enough," Eli growled. "Order! Order!" The judge slammed his hand on the desk. He looked at Mr. Reed. He looked at the document. He looked at Eli. He knew who had money. He knew who had connections. He knew who was a prominent man and who was a local pariah. "Mr. Reed," the judge said, clearing his throat, "your document seems to be in order. It is signed by a magistrate in Ohio. It claims guardianship. This marriage performed without the father's consent for a troubled woman, well, it is thin, very thin." "It is a marriage," Eli said, his voice deadly quiet. "And you," the judge said, pointing a sausage-like finger at Eli, "are interfering with this man's lawful claim. He has a paper. You have what? A woman's word? A woman he claims is unwell? That is not enough. Not in my court." "It is a lie!" Clara cried out. Mr. Thorne, I am ordering you to release this woman to her father's custody." Eli looked at Clara. He saw the pure, animal terror in her eyes. He looked at her father. He looked at the judge. He made a calculation. "No," Eli said. The judge sighed, as if this were a great inconvenience. "I was afraid of that. You are a hard man, Thorne, stubborn. You are in contempt. You refuse a lawful order." He looked at the two hired guns, who were now standing by the door. "Take Mr. Thorne into custody. Contempt of court. Interfering with an officer." "You cannot!" Clara screamed, rushing forward, but one of the men caught her arm, his fingers biting in. Eli did not fight. He did not move. He just looked at Clara, his face a mask of stone. But his eyes were full of fire. They said, "Stay strong. This is not over." The hired gun unbuckled Eli's gun belt, his hand shaking slightly as he did. They let him out. Clara watched through the dirty window as they marched him across the muddy street to the small, one-room stone building that served as the town jail. "As for you, girl," the judge said, "you are remanded to your father's custody, but since he has no proper facilities, you will stay at the boarding house. Mrs. Gables, I will place a guard on your door. See that you do not try to run again. Clara," her father added, his voice low and cold, "it will be most unpleasant for everyone." The room at the boarding house was clean. It smelled of lavender and dust, and it was a cage. Clara sat on the edge of the stiff bed, her hands clenched in her lap. From her window, if she pressed her face to the glass, she could see the jail, a single, dark, barred square. Eli was in there. The guard at her door was one of the hired guns. He was paid by her father. She was a prisoner. There was a knock. "It's your cousin," the guard's voice grunted. "She wants a word." Amelia swept in. She was not wearing her muddy riding clothes. She was dressed in fine, dark silk. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp, angry. "Well," Amelia said, closing the door, "you have made a thorough and vulgar mess of things, have you not?" "Get out," Clara said, her voice dead. "I am trying to help you, you little fool," Amelia snapped. "Your father he is beyond furious, not just at you, and at this whole sordid situation. This trip, it has cost him a fortune. He is embarrassed. I do not care about his money or his embarrassment." "You should," Amelia said. She walked closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He is going to take you back, and he is talking about that place. Clara, the asylum. Dr. Worth's asylum." Clara's blood ran cold. He had threatened that. It was his final weapon. "But," Amelia continued, "it does not have to be that way." She opened her fine leather purse. She pulled out a small, thick wad of bills. This is $200. It is all I could get, from my allowance, for my wedding clothes." "A bribe?" Clara was disgusted. A fresh start," Amelia said, her eyes darting to the door. "Listen, you tell my father that you lied. You tell him you were the one with Mr. Davies. At the saloon, you tell him you were so ashamed. You ran away, and then you let this rancher, this Thorne, take you in. You confess to it all. You beg his forgiveness." Clara stared at her, the cold in her stomach turning to a hot, sickening rage. "You want me to confess to your sin?" "If you do," Amelia said, her voice a desperate hiss, he will be angry, of course, but he will see it as your shame, not a stain on my marriage, my engagement. It is fragile. Clara, Mr. Davies's family, they are watching. If you confess, father's honor is satisfied. He might not send you to the asylum. He might just send you to a convent, somewhere quiet. And you can take this money, and you will be safe." It was the truth, the real, rotten, selfish truth. Amelia was willing to let her be locked away, to sacrifice her completely, just to save her own comfortable engagement. Clara looked at her cousin, the girl she had grown up with. You did sleep with him, did you not, Mr. Davies?" Amelia's pretty face crumpled. He was so charming, so powerful. I did not mean it just happened. I love him. Clara, do you not understand? I love him." "Love?" Clara's voice was ice. "You do not know the meaning of the word." She stood up, her small frame vibrating with a strength she had not known she possessed. "I know a man who faced down this entire town for my honor. A man who is sitting in that jail, right now, because he would not let me go. A man who is 10 times what Mr. Davies will ever be. A man who is good. And he is my husband." "He is a killer!" Amelia shrieked, recoiling. "He is a man," Clara said, her voice low. "And you are a coward. Take your money and get out of my room." Amelia's face went white, then red, with rage. Fine. You want him? You want this mud? You can have it. When father takes you to Dr. Worth's, you can scream his name, and no one will listen." Amelia stormed out, slamming the door. Clara was alone. The terror was back. Colder this time. The asylum. He would do it. He was a man who kept his threats. She had until morning. Night fell. A cold, wet wind started to blow, rattling the window pane. It was not a blizzard, but a freezing, miserable rain that quickly turned to sleet. Clara looked out the window. The guard was still there, slumped in his chair just outside her door, a bottle by his side. Her father, she had heard, was at the saloon, celebrating his legal victory with Judge Hemlock. She had to get to Eli. She waited. Midnight, 1 in the morning. The guard was snoring, a deep, wet sound. She had to find the key. The jail, it was a small town. The key was not with the judge. It would be with the man who had the prisoner. The guard, the hired gun, who was now acting as jailer and her warden. She crept to the door, her heart a cold drum against her ribs. She opened it. Just a crack. The hallway was dim. The guard was asleep, his head on his chest, stinking of cheap whiskey. A ring of heavy iron keys was on his belt, hooked on a leather loop. She slipped out, barefoot. The floorboards were cold. She reached, her hand trembling so badly she thought she would wake him. She touched the cold metal. He stirred, grunting in his sleep. She froze. He settled, snoring again. With a tiny, quick motion, she unhooked the ring of keys. She did not breathe. She backed away. She ran. Down the stairs, her bare feet silent on the worn carpet. Out the back door, into the alley. The sleet hit her like 1,000 needles, plastering her thin dress to her skin in seconds. She ran through the mud, to the dark livery. She could not hitch a team. But her father's buggy, no, the outline. Stolen wagon. She saw it, behind the livery, a simple buckboard. The owner was probably in the saloon, drinking, and had left his horse tied, huddled under a thin blanket. It was sloppy. It was fast. She did not stop. She ran across the street to the small, dark stone jail. She rattled the heavy wooden door. "Eli," she whispered, her voice frantic. "Eli." She heard a sound. "Clara," his voice. "Clara, what? Get out of here. He will hurt you." "I have the keys," she sobbed, fumbling with the heavy ring. The sleet was blinding her. Her hands numb, slick with ice. The first key it scraped, but would not turn. The second, it jammed. The third, it was a big heavy iron key. It slid in. The lock, old and rusty, gave a loud, painful click. She pulled the door open. He was there, a dark shape in the dark room. He grabbed her, pulling her inside, out of the wind, his arms crushing her. "You how?" "Amelia," she gasped, her teeth chattering. She told me. He is sending me to an asylum. Eli, he is not bluffing. He means it." His whole body went hard. "The guard, the keys." "Asleep, at the boarding house. My father, he is at the saloon, with the judge." We have minutes, at most," he said. He grabbed her hand. "The town, they'll be on us." There is a buckboard, behind the livery. A horse it is still hitched." "Go," he said. They ran, out of the jail, into the black, storm-filled street. The mud sucked at her bare feet. They reached the buckboard. The horse stamped, nervous in the sleet. "Get in," Eli commanded. He unhitched the rein, his hands sure and fast. He swung up onto the seat, pulling her up beside him. He did not have a whip. He snapped the reins. "Here!" The horse, startled, lurching, pulled the wagon forward. They clattered over the rough, muddy street, out of the sleeping, corrupt town, and into the black, howling wilderness. They rode for hours, the horse slipping, Eli's arm a band of iron around her, holding her to his side. They rode up, into the hills. The sleet turned to wet, heavy snow, a late spring storm, thick and blinding. The horse was failing. Where are we going?" She shivered, huddled under his arm, her body numb. "A place," he said, his voice tight. "A line cabin, up high, used it for the cattle drives. Before Matthew." They found it near dawn. A small, one-room shack, barely more than a shed, built of rough pine, nestled into the side of a mountain. It was shelter. Eli got the horse under a small, rocky overhang, covering it with the blanket from the wagon. Then he half-carried Clara inside. He moved with a grim, practiced speed. He had the door barred. He had a small, rusty stove in the corner, and a pile of dry wood stacked beside it. He had a fire roaring in minutes. The tiny cabin filled with smoke. Then, blessedly, with warmth. They were alone. They were safe. For now. Clara was shaking violently, the cold and the adrenaline and the terror all crashing in on her. He took her wet, ruined dress off, wrapping her in a dusty, mouse-chewed blanket he had found in a crate. He went through his own wet coat, which he had grabbed from the jail. From the inner pocket, he pulled a folded, damp piece of paper. It was her father's document, the one from the judge. Eli held it up in the dim, gray light of the dawn, the ink running. "Stolen property," he read, his voice full of a quiet, cold contempt. Clara, wrapped in the blanket, her feet near the growing warmth of the stove, watched him. She was so tired of running, so tired of being what she was. She whispered the old, bitter words, the words her father had given her. "I'm only a punishment." Eli looked at her. He saw her, pale and freezing, her feet cut from the run. He saw her, having just defied her father, and a judge, and a man with a gun, to come and free him. He saw her, not as a burden, not as a thing he had to protect. He saw her as his strength. He walked to the stove, the paper in his hand. "Then why?" he said, his voice rough with an emotion so deep it shook his entire body. "Do I feel like I have been blessed?" He opened the small, cast-iron stove door. The firelight glowed on his face. He fed the document to the flames. They watched it together, watched it curl, turn black, and vanish into ash. The snow was falling thick now, a real heavy blizzard, out of season. It was covering their tracks. It was protecting them. The cabin was tiny, a single bed frame in the corner, a table, the stove. It was all they needed. The fear was gone. The chase was over. For now, there was only the sound of the wind, and the crackle of the fire, and the warmth of the small room. He turned to her. He did not speak. He just looked at her. He knelt in front of her, and he touched her face, his calloused thumb brushing the wet hair from her temple. They made love by the fire. It was not like the first time, that hungry, desperate finding. This was deliberate. This was a sealing. It was slow and deep and defiant. It was a vow, made in secret. While the world hunted them, it was a claim. You are mine, I am yours, and no one will ever take us apart. Afterward, they lay by the fire, tangled in the one dusty blanket. "He will not stop," Clara whispered, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "My father, he will not stop. His pride, his name, it is all he has." "I know," Eli said, his hand stroking her hair, the other arm holding her tight. "He will come. When this snow clears, he will come back to the ranch. He will find it empty. But he will send men. He will hunt us." What do we do, Eli?" He was quiet for a long time, watching the flames dance. "The ranch it is poisoned. That land Matthew's grave is there. Rosalie's memory is there. Your father's hate. It is not a home. It is just a place I have been hiding." He held her tighter. "Jeb, my old ranch hand. He is an honest man. I can get word to him. He can sell the ranch, the cattle. He can get what he can for it." "Sell it?" she whispered. It was his home, his inheritance. "It is just land," he said. It is not this." He kissed the top of her head. "We take the money. We go south to Colorado, or west, Oregon. Somewhere no one knows my name, or yours. We start fresh, new names." He pulled back, just enough so he could see her face in the firelight. It will be a hard life, Clara. We will have nothing, just what Jeb can send us. I will be a wanted man, for breaking jail." She looked at him, at this man, this killer, this good man, this man who was willing to give up his land, his name, his entire life, just to be with her. She smiled, a real true smile, her first in days. "I do not care where we go," she whispered, her hand coming up to rest on his rough cheek. I have been cold all my life. Eli, I have never been warm until you." She kissed him, softly. "I will go anywhere, so long as it is with you." Wyoming was a scar, healed over but still tender to the touch. The money from the ranch, Jeb, the old hand, had been true. Selling it all for pennies on the dollar was enough. It was enough to buy 2 tickets south, enough to buy new names, enough to buy a few months of peace. They were Mr. and Mrs. James Warren. The name felt strange on Clara's tongue, but Sarah Warren felt clean. James Warren was a quiet man, a man with no history, a man who was good with his hands. They settled in a small, high mountain town in Colorado called Golden Springs. It was a town built on mining silver, but the silver was playing out, and the town was settling into something quieter. It was just a place. James found work at the livery, breaking mustangs. He was a natural with horses. They were not like men. They did not judge. They only knew if you were steady, if you were afraid, or if you were kind. Eli, James, was steady, and he was, to them, kind. Clara, now Sarah, took in washing. It was hard, back-breaking work. Her hands, which had been pale and soft in Ohio, were now permanently red, chapped and strong. She scrubbed the miners' heavy canvas trousers, the merchants' fine linen shirts, the saloon girls' cheap, bright calico. Their home was 2 small rooms tacked onto the back of the laundry she ran. A small, lean-to building that smelled of lye soap, hot irons, and starch. It was a life, a real one. They were poor. They were anonymous. They were almost happy. The nights were the best. In Wyoming, they had slept together in the cold, holding on, a comfort against the fear. Here, in the small, clean room, they slept as man and wife. He would come home, smelling of hay and horses, and wash the grime from his hands. He would sit, and she would rub the ache from his shoulders. He would watch her cook, the quiet hum in her throat the only music in the room. That peace, it was a thin blanket on a cold night, but it was theirs. Spring turned to a hot, dusty summer. Clara had been tired, a tiredness that went bone deep, one that sleep did not cure. The heavy, wet loads of laundry felt heavier. Then, one morning, the sharp, clean smell of the lye soap, a smell that was usually a comfort, made her stomach clench. She was sick, right there in the yard. It was a simple, terrifying math, a woman's math. She waited until he came home. He saw her sitting, not mending, not cooking, just sitting, her hands still in her lap. "Sarah?" he asked, the new name still sounding a little stiff, but it was his. You are unwell?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide, full of a fragile, terrifying joy. "James, I think—" She did not know how to say it. I am with child." He froze. He had been cleaning his hands in the basin, and he just stopped, water dripping from his elbows. A child, a baby. This was not part of the plan. They were fugitives. They had nothing. A child was a danger, a complication. He walked over to her, slowly, as if she were a wild thing that might bolt. He knelt in front of her chair. He did not say a word. He just looked at her. Are you angry?" she whispered. "No," he said, his voice a rough, stunned sound. He reached out, his hand, that large, calloused, scarred hand, and he laid it on her stomach. It was gentle, so gentle. A child. Oh, that was the look on his face. He had been a killer, a ghost, a fugitive. He had never, in all his dark imaginings, thought he would be a father. Is it real?" he asked. She laughed, a small, tearful sound, and covered his hand with hers. "It is real." He bent his head, his rough forehead resting on her knee. He was not crying. He was breathing, as if for the first time. They had a future, a real one, something new, something that was not broken, not haunted, a gift. The West was a big country, but it was not big enough for a man to run from $500. His name was Pike. He was a man who lived on other people's misery, a bounty hunter who did not care about the law, only the reward. He had been tracking Eli for months. The trail had gone cold in Wyoming, but he had heard whispers. A quiet man, good with horses, a pretty, plain wife matching the description from Mr. Reed. Pike drifted into Golden Springs. He watched. Eli felt the stare. He was at the livery, shoeing a heavy-set mare. He felt that old, cold feeling, the one that meant a man was watching you, measuring you. He looked up, across the dusty street. Pike was leaning against the assayer's office, chewing on a piece of straw. He was smiling, a flat, cold, dead smile. Pike lifted one hand, and in it was a crinkled, faded piece of paper. The bounty, from Wyoming, for Eli Thorne. Eli dropped the horse's hoof. He did not run. He finished the shoe, his hands steady, his stomach a cold knot. He collected his pay. He walked home. "Clara," he said, opening the door. The smell of stew and baking bread filled the small room. She looked up, smiling. The smile died. "Clara, pack, now. Just the money. We have to go." "What, Eli James, what is it?" "He's here," he said, grabbing their small box of savings. "A bounty hunter. He found me." But it was too late. The shadow fell across the open door. "Eli Thorne." Pike's voice drawled. He was a large man, sloppy, with a confidence that came from carrying a big gun. "Took me 6 months to find this rat hole. Your father-in-law, he wants you back. Bad. Seems you corrupted his little girl." Eli pushed Clara behind him. "This is not Wyoming. That bounty it is not. It is not lawful here." "Lawful?" Pike laughed. "It is $500. That is all the law I need. Now you come quiet, or I take you back cold. I get paid either way." Clara stepped out from behind Eli. Her face was white, but her eyes they were on fire. "Please, sir, it is a misunderstanding. He is a good man. My father, he is mistaken." She was fumbling with the box, the one Eli had just grabbed. We have money. It is all we have. $300. Please, take it. Just leave us be. Please, I am. We are expecting a child." She held out the money. Pike looked at the money. He looked at Clara. He saw her fear. He saw her condition. And he smiled. "Well, now, 300. That is a good start. But the bounty is 500. And you are a fine-looking woman." He stepped toward her, reaching out, not for the money, but for her. Maybe you can convince me to let him go." He grabbed her arm. "No!" Eli roared. Pike was not expecting the speed. He was expecting the broken man. He got the man who had fought Sloan. He got the man who had survived the duel. Eli crossed the room in one blind, red wave. It was not a fight. It was a storm. But Pike was a bounty hunter. He was fast, too. As Eli grabbed him, Pike shoved Clara, hard. He shoved her, pregnant, into the wall. She cried out, a high, sharp sound of pain, and crumpled, her hands going to her stomach. The sound, it broke Eli. He hit Pike, a devastating blow to the face. Pike stumbled back, spitting blood, his hand going for his gun. You crazy?" But Pike was not just a gun. He was a knife fighter. As Eli lunged again, Pike drew a long skinning knife from his belt. He lunged under Eli's arm. Eli felt the cold, sharp bite, a fire in his side. He looked down. The knife, it was deep. Pike was laughing, trying to pull the knife free. Eli did not feel the pain. He just felt the red. He grabbed the man's wrist, the one holding the knife, and he did not let go. He did not have his own gun. He had left it when he started his new life. But Pike had his... Eli grabbed the bounty hunter's gun, still in its holster. He pulled it, he twisted. The sound was deafening in the small, soap-scented room. Silence. Pike slumped to the floor, his eyes wide with surprise. Dead. Eli stood, swaying. He looked at the smoking gun in his hand. He looked at the dead man. He looked at the blood, his blood pouring from his side. Clara. She was on the floor, white as a sheet, her eyes closed, her hands clutching her stomach. "Eli," she whispered, her voice a thin thread. The baby." He stumbled, the gun clattering to the floor. He had to Clara. Stay with me." He could not save her. He was wounded. He was a killer. Again. He dragged himself to the door. He held onto the frame. The gunshot it had brought people. He could hear shouting. "Help!" Eli roared, his voice hoarse. "Please, my wife, help her!" People came running. The livery owner, Mrs. Gable, the preacher's wife, who Clara did laundry for, and the sheriff. Sheriff Miller was a decent man, an older man, with sad eyes and a steady hand. He took in the scene. The dead bounty hunter. Eli James slumped in the doorway, bleeding, and Clara Sarah on the floor. Get the doctor!" Miller yelled. "Mrs. Gable, tend to Sarah." He looked at Eli, his face grim. "James, what in God's name happened here?" Eli looked at the sheriff. He was done running. He was done with lies. My name, Sheriff, it is not James Warren. It is Eli Thorne. That man, he came for me, for a bounty. He hurt my wife." He held up his hands, covered in his own blood. I will go with you. I am not running. Just save her. Please, save my wife, and my child." The next few weeks were a blur of pain and fear. The town doctor, a kind, overworked man, saved Clara. He saved the baby. It was close, he told the sheriff. She is a strong woman, but she must not be moved. She almost lost the child. Eli's wound was deep. The knife had missed anything vital, but it had been close. The doctor stitched him up, and Sheriff Miller, true to his word, locked him in the town's small, 2-cell jail. But this was not Three Forks. Sheriff Miller was not Judge Hemlock. He was a man of the law. He sat with Eli, and he listened. He heard the whole story: Ohio, Amelia, the saloon, the father, the letter, the duel, Rosalie, the trial, the jailbreak. You have had a hard run, son," Miller said, his face grim. I killed him," Eli said, his voice flat. "The bounty hunter." "His name was Pike," Miller said. "He was known for being fast and greedy, and not particular about his bounties. He's caused trouble in this state before." Sheriff Miller did what Judge Hemlock had not. He investigated. He sent telegraphs to Wyoming, to Ohio. He asked questions. And the town rallied, not for Eli Thorne, the killer, but for Sarah Warren, the quiet woman who did their laundry. Mrs. Gable, the preacher's wife, she sat with Clara while she recovered. She brought food. She testified. "Sheriff," she told Miller, I have known Sarah Clara for months. She is the kindest, most gentle soul I have ever met. That man, Pike, he was a brute. I saw him in the saloon. He was a bad man." The livery owner, he vouched for James. He is the best man with a horse I have ever seen. "Sheriff, he is quiet. He does not cause trouble. He just works, and he loves that woman. I would trust him with my own life." The telegraphs came back. The story was messy. The Wyoming marshal, a new one, wired. "The duel of Eli Thorne? Yes, it was ruled self-defense at the time, but the deceased's fiancée, a Miss Rosalie, and a Mr. Reed from Ohio, they had influence. They spread the killer story. The bounty it was for jailbreak, but the Judge Hemlock he was later removed for taking bribes. It was all there. The rot, the corruption." Sheriff Miller held a formal inquiry. It was not a trial. It was just him and a traveling magistrate. They called Eli. He stood, pale, his side still aching. "The killing of Mr. Pike," the magistrate said, "it is ruled justifiable. Self-defense and defense of your wife. We have the doctor's testimony. Pike, he attacked her. You defended your home." The bounty?" Eli asked, his voice thick. "The bounty, it was fraudulent," Sheriff Miller said, putting on his spectacles. "Issued by a corrupt judge, paid for by a grieving father who seems to have lied to the court. The jailbreak given the circumstances, a father threatening to put his own daughter in an asylum, we find that act was one of necessity, not malice. He looked at Eli.
The duel in Wyoming. That is the Shadow's son.
I know, Eli said, looking at the floor. I was faster. I do not know if I meant. It does not matter, Miller said, holding up a new telegraph. From Cheyenne. A marshal there, he knew of Rosalie. She tried the same trick on 2 minors. A year later, she is in jail for fraud and for inciting violence. The duel, it was a tragedy. Mr. Thorne, but legally, it was self-defense. The magistrate nodded.
Eli Thorne or James Warren, you are a free man.
Eli just stood there. He could not understand. A free man. The town, Miller said, standing up, offering his hand. They like you, James. They like your wife. You are offered a second chance. If you want it. Eli took the sheriff's hand. He did not have the words. The final scene. It was 2 months later. The small cabin it was home. The town had helped. The men, they had fixed the door. The women, they had brought curtains. The wound in Eli's side was a long, puckered, red scar. Clara, she was whole, and it was time. The midwife, Mrs. Gable, she was there. Eli, he paced the small floor, terrified. He had faced down guns. He had survived a duel. This was life. It terrified him. He heard Clara cry out, a cry of pain and effort. And then a new sound, a thin, small, wailing cry. A new cry. It is a girl, Mrs. Gable said, her face shining with sweat and joy. Oh, she is perfect. She cleaned the baby, wrapped her in a soft, clean flannel. James, father, you hold her. Eli's hands were shaking. I am covered in sawdust. You are her father, the midwife said, and she placed the small, warm bundle in his arms. Eli looked down. He held his daughter. She was so light, so small. Her face was red, crumpled, and she was beautiful. He held her. He held her like she was made of light. He held her like she was something so precious, so holy, that his killer's hands were not worthy. Clara, her face pale, her hair damp, watched him. She saw the look on his face, the awe, the love. Tears of joy, they slipped down her cheeks. She reached out a hand and touched the baby's tiny, perfect head. You're not a punishment, Clara whispered, her voice thick, broken with emotion. She was talking to her daughter. You are a gift. Eli, his throat tight, his own eyes burning, he could not speak. He sat on the edge of the bed. He wrapped one arm around Clara, his strong, steady arm, and with the other he held their daughter. He held his family. He bent his head, his rough beard brushing them both. He whispered, his voice full of a love so fierce, so completed it had washed away all the blood, all the guilt, all the shame. So are you, he whispered. Thank you so much for listening to our story tonight. We sure would appreciate it if you left a comment. Let us know what part of the country you're listening from, so we can all feel a little closer around this fire. Don't forget to subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts on Eli and Clara's journey.